Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gordon Fidelford. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm the Executive Director of Seattle Neighborhood Greenways. I can see him pronouns. Well, tonight's about to get even better. I thank you all for blowing up Beyonce and coming to listen to our panel. It's going to be equally amazing. And I'll turn things over to Ryan Packer from the Urban Institute shortly. But before that, a few things. Seattle Neighborhood Greenways is concluding our Shaping Seattle series this year by focusing on building a walkable city. Because for more than a decade, we've been involved in helping make every neighborhood a great place to walk, bike, and live. And our work is really guided by three values of safety, equity, and sustainability. And a really big goal of this evening is to build relationships and to build bridges between advocacy communities. So if you came in here and you're passionate about walking, biking, rolling, and transit, I hope you'll leave equally passionate about land use and housing. And if you came in here really passionate about housing affordability and building a just city for everyone to live in, I hope you will leave equally passionate about walking, biking, rolling, and transit. It takes all of us together to shape Seattle. And of course, our event wouldn't be possible without our amazing sponsors: Expedia Group, Washington Bike Law, the Seattle Department of Transportation, the Bowman Fund, Lime, Fleming Law, LMN Architects, Methuen, Site Workshop, MIG, GGN, Beneficial State Bank, Commute Seattle, WSB, Alta Planning and Design. Thank you all for your support. We give them a round of applause. And I also want to thank the staff. Can SNG staff raise your hand? And, all right. And if you're a board member, can you raise your hand? Thank you, board members. And if you're volunteering for the event or you volunteer otherwise, can you raise your hand? All right. And I also want to thank our guests from the Seattle Department of Transportation, Joanna Valencia and Tracy Krawczyk over here. And Patrice Carroll will be here from OPCD. Thank you, Patrice, for being here. They will be here after the program to talk to you about the official Seattle planning processes that folks will be talking about tonight. So without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce our moderator, Ryan Packer. In my opinion, Ryan is the perfect person for this panel tonight because they have some of the most exciting and in-depth reporting on transportation and land use out there. If you don't know them, check them out on Patreon or The Urbanist. Really fantastic to have Ryan kicking things off. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks so much, Gordon. Really appreciate that warm welcome. As Gordon mentioned, my name is Ryan Packer. I've been writing about land use, transportation, and the intersection of the two of those things since 2015 at the Urbanist. Before I get to our panel of the smartest people in the entire city of Seattle, I'm going to go ahead and do some very important business, which is taking a moment to honor the place and the land where we're gathering tonight. I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered together on the traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples, the first people of Seattle, specifically the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. I'd also really like to express gratitude to El Centro de la Raza for hosting us here tonight here at the Centilia Cultural Center. It was such Now I'm going to go on to our esteemed panelists. I'm not kidding when I say they are the smartest people in the entire city. Going from our other side here, Cecilia Black on the end is an organizer with the Disability Mobility Initiative, and will share upcoming opportunities to create accessible streets for all, including exciting sidewalk legislation that's going to be heard in the Transportation Committee, introduced by Councilmember Tammy Morales here on Tuesday. Claire Cantor is a community organizer with Seattle Neighborhood Greenways and will be providing insights into how you can shape the Seattle Transportation Plan. We'll talk a little bit about what that is if you're not familiar later tonight, which will determine what our streets look like over the next 20 years. Shirley Long is a organizer with Share the Cities Organizing Collective, and will share how the city must address our housing crisis with walkable, park-oriented development. Really exciting. And finally, Tiernan Martin manages FutureWise's Livable Communities program and co-chairs the Complete Communities Coalition. He'll share why transportation and land use planning go hand in hand, and how you can advocate for both by weighing in on Seattle's comprehensive plan update. So we're going to try and get into our organic discussion about the intersection of land use and transportation tonight. But first, I'm going to pass it over to our individual panelists to kind of talk about their individual approach to how they view this work and do it on a day-to-day basis. And I'm going to go back in the opposite direction and start with Tiernan.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be on the stage with my panelists. My name is Tiernan Martin. My pronouns are he and him, and I work at FutureWise, but I'm also here representing a coalition of groups that have come together to advocate for sustainable, affordable, and equitable land use and housing in Seattle. My work at FutureWise has mainly focused on local work, specifically the sort of land use policy work that Seattle and cities in the Puget Sound are doing. My colleagues work down in Olympia on legislation to improve the state's Growth Management Act, and we also do legal work across the entire state of Washington to to improve the quality of urban planning and land management. So that's my day job. I'm, as I said, involved in the Complete Communities Coalition. I co-chair that along with Jesse Simpson from the Housing Development Consortium. And that group came together with the explicit intent of working to make Seattle's next comprehensive plan the best one that it's ever seen. It's a once in a decade opportunity to transform the way that we plan for more people to live here, for the types of amenities that they have access to the transportation networks that they use, and to meeting their climate goals and commitments. So we are really excited about this comprehensive plan update. It's been a long time coming, and I'm looking forward to talking about how land use fits into that and how it intersects with transportation.
Let me know, like, raise your hands if you can't hear me, because they're bad at talking into the mic. So hi everyone, I'm Shirley Lung, and I'm by training climate and water scientist. So if you guys have any questions about that kind of stuff, I'm your person, you can ask me. That's my day job, but in my volunteer life, I organize with Share the City Organizing Collective. And what we do there is we advocate for more socially just, inclusive, and environmentally friendly, of course, land use policies. And so what we've done in the past is we kind of choose examples of the worst possible uses of land use in the city of Seattle, and we try to tell people about them and get them to be changed, right? Through advocacy and community organizing. And something that we've done recently was we helped more people engage in the comp plan commenting process. So I don't know if y'all have tried to try to get your comments in and try to tell the city what you want, but it's not always the easiest process. So we got together as a group of volunteers and made this template, kind of like we called it the alternative 6 option generator. And you were able to go and, personalize it for what you really want, but it kind of just gave you a format for like how you could talk about things. And so with that, we drove almost 10% of engagement on the comp plan portal online. So almost 10% of the comments were made with our generator. And so that was something we were really happy with. But before I hand it off, I also just want to give you guys an idea of what Share the City is and my own vision of a city could be. So this picture in the background is kind of showing like what we imagine, like my own personal dream place to live, right? You have this beautiful, this is only maybe 3 or 4 stories. It could be higher, it could be 7, it could be 10, that's fine. And this beautiful shared courtyard that's open to the public, right? No cars come through. It's so quiet. There's no air pollution. All you can hear is the sounds of happy children running around, dogs barking, the occasional bike bell. Sometimes you eavesdrop on your neighbors' conversations, right? It's an amazing place to live. You know all your neighbors because there's a mix of social housing, cross-class, rent-stabilized units, and everybody lives here for a really long time, so you really get to know each other. And not only that, but there's also, the streets are so safe that I let my kids walk to school by themselves. And on the way to school, they say hi to all their neighbors. They're like, hey Clara, what's up, all the way to school. When they come back, there's a child care center at the bottom of our building. And there's a Hong Kong cafe. I'm from Hong Kong. It has the best Hong Kong milk tea in the city, okay? So this is all right here. And this is what we can do with this comp plan process, you guys. So, that's it.
Hi everyone, I'm Clara Cantor. I'm a community organizer with Seattle Neighborhood Greenways. I recognize a lot of faces in the room, and it's nice to see you all. With Seattle Neighborhood Greenways, I lead a lot of our bike advocacy and our annual budget advocacy with the Solidarity Budget Coalition. But I'm here specifically to talk about our work with the Seattle Transportation Plan and the other kind of long-term planning that Seattle has been doing over the last couple of years, really, but coming to a head this fall and winter, which is very exciting. My photo behind me is sort of a direct contrast to the one that Shirley shared. This is a photo of, it's a little hard to see with them sitting in front of the bottom, but it's of MLK, Martin Luther King Way in South Seattle, right near Graham Street. And I posted this photo specifically because technically every intersection in Seattle is a crosswalk. But there's a lot of really major arterials that really make that not the case. For example, I would not want to cross the street right here. It's physically impossible to cross the street at MLK in some places because of the light rail going down the middle. And I wanted to illustrate this street in particular because there's a lot of our city that is built like this. There's a lot of places in our city where it feels really hard to be a pedestrian. It's very, it feels unsafe or uncomfortable. It takes a really long time to walk anywhere. I'm often walking around the South End with holding the hand of my 3-year-old or pushing a stroller, and it takes us even longer to get anywhere. If like we come to MLK and we have to walk 2 or 3 blocks south to get to the nearest safe crossing, I'm like, with a 3-year-old, that is a very long time. And it means that I often don't, I just make the decision that I don't want to do that. And so I don't go to the businesses or the community centers or the destinations that I would be going to on either side of the street. So I shared this photo specifically because I wanted to show the ways that streets can really divide our communities and our neighborhoods in a really unpleasant, unfortunate way. You know, the whole light rail going down the middle of the street also means the street is really unsafe because it prioritizes speed for the light rail going north and south, and that means that the vehicle traffic also has a lot of speed going north-south. And the sign speed limit on this street is 25 miles per hour, but in average it's probably closer to 45. And that was intentional. That was by design because we wanted to speed up the light rail. And there's a whole other conversation about the light rail being on the ground in this part of the city instead of being elevated or underground like in the rest of the city. But here it divides our community in a very real way, especially when you're getting around walking or rolling. And it means that we, it's sort of the opposite of the idyllic place that Shirley just described. And it's a real great illustration of the way that our long-term planning really impacts our daily lives, the places we decide to go, the places we decide not to go, and the ways that we feel community with each other. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. That is a great segue. Also, I'm very quiet, so also let me know if I'm not speaking close to the microphone. I am an organizer, a new organizer with the Centilia Building Initiative, and our one of our big focuses is sidewalks. We know a lot about drivers. Our transportation system was made for and by drivers primarily, and so in 2020, CMI did survey disabled non-drivers throughout the state, and one of the big themes that came out of that research project was that sidewalks were a huge barrier for people with disabilities in accessing their communities and simply leaving their house and getting to the mass transit that we're investing in. And it's a system that is not working. Sidewalks are very unique when you think about transportation systems or even just our parks in general. Unlike our roads, unlike our buses, there's no one jurisdiction that has responsibility over sidewalks, regulating or maintaining sidewalks. In Seattle, like most cities across the country, state and city code puts the responsibility on property owners adjacent to sidewalks. So that means in Seattle, 11,000 city blocks do not have sidewalks at all. That's about almost a quarter of our streets without sidewalks. Of the streets with sidewalks, about half of them are in poor condition and limit accessibility in some way. And we have budgeted to construct about 27 blocks a year. So that's over 11,000 blocks that are missing sidewalks, and we have money to fix and build 27 blocks a year. I think the estimates to make our city sidewalks completely accessible with curb cuts, sidewalks, and accessible pedestrian pedestrian signals range between 1.6 and 5.7 billion dollars. And for context, our transportation levy that passed in 2015 was $1 billion for 9 years, and that's about 30% of the Scott's budget. So at this rate, we're on track to make our sidewalks fully accessible in about 1,800 years. And for people with disabilities, that means every day, like, we're unable to leave our houses and we're unable to access mass transit. And so one of our goals is to really reframe how we think about sidewalks and hold them, at least at the same level as roads. When roads are the way that cars move through the city, pedestrians also need a way to move through the city. And I think we'll talk about this in a moment, but one of the first step is how we fund and prioritize sidewalks, and so we have exciting legislation that is going to be heard and hopefully voted on in city council on Tuesday. That would require SDOT to either fix or build missing sidewalks on all major construction road projects.
So the title of this event is called Building a Walkable City. And, I think there's two parts to that, which is sort of where we live and how we get around. And so I kind of want to start with Shirley here with one of our first questions, which is sort of how do you view the intersection between transportation and, what we call land use, which is just where people live, where people work, where people go to school?
Yeah, great question. So the way that I think about the two together is really I think about how our city just has way too many cars. And why is that? It's because of the way our land use is set up. And so you think about all of the single family neighborhoods that are car dependent, and then you think about how we're not building enough housing or enough affordable housing in our city. And so people have to live really far away and commute in, right? There's over 90,000 super commuters into Seattle. That's people who have to travel more than 3 hours every day to come into their jobs. And so I think about that as one of the primary reasons why we don't have safe streets is because there are too many cars, because too many people need their cars because they live in car-dependent neighborhoods. And so what can we do about it? We can build more dense, walkable housing in neighborhoods, and that reduces car usage. And we really need to think about where we're doing that, though, because there are, we already have so many apartments and things like that on our dangerous arterials, like Claire was talking about, but we don't have that kind of housing in these very quiet, single-family neighborhoods, such as our favorite one to pick on is Laurelhurst, because we have a focus on a parcel there, which I can tell you about if you guys come to my table afterwards. But the way that I think about it is that there are holes in the city that are missing density, right? Then there's holes in the city that are missing parks. And that's how I think of, and greenways and safe streets. And so what we need to do, again, is build more dense walkable housing in those neighborhoods that currently don't have it, but we also need to add safe streets to the neighborhoods that already have the dense housing. And so there should not be, I live in Lake City, there should not be Lake City Way, a giant, sometimes 6-ish lanes, depends on where, arterial running through the middle of my neighborhood. There should be not a car arterial, but there should be a bike arterial. There should be a Burt Gilman style trail running through the middle of my neighborhood, not a Lake City Way. And there should be a pedestrian plaza. There should be farmers markets, dancing, music, whatever you want, public space for people in the middle of these neighborhoods. And one other point I want to make is, there's lots of points, but one main point I want to make is that when we have our city set up this way, how it is now, it's for the wealthy, because who's living in these detached single-family homes, and who's doing most of the driving, right? It's people who can afford to do those things, who can afford those houses, we shouldn't have a city designed for wealthy people. We need to make it so that it's easy to get around without a car. And driving should be just so much harder. It should be so much harder to just get around with a car.
Tiernan, what's the Seattle Comprehensive Plan, and how is it a barrier or a pathway to some of the things that Shirley's talking?
Good question. So the Seattle Comprehensive Plan is kind of the planning document that the city is required to have that says where they are going to accommodate growth and what can be located where. So sort of the land use that Shirley was just talking about, transportation policy, capital facilities, and a bunch of other legally required chapters. And the reason that it's so important is because the city makes lots of decisions and writes lots of plans, but all of those things need to respond back to this comprehensive plan. They all need to fit together. And this is our moment to change that beginning plan and everything downstream of it. So one of the features of Seattle's growth strategy and land use plan is neighborhoods where only detached single-family homes have been able to be built for a very, very long time. The other side of that is what we call urban villages. That's where you get some of these dense, mixed-use, well-transit-served, sometimes walkable communities. And unfortunately, one of the effects of concentrating that growth in our urban villages over time has been that the people who live there have experienced the brunt of the growth and the redevelopment that's happened in Seattle over the past couple of decades. And, that's a challenge. I don't want to sugarcoat it. When your neighborhood changes around you, you might feel things like loss. You might physically be required to move. And sometimes you're priced out of that neighborhood. And the urban village strategy has pushed that type of change into places where we have the most renters in the city. And what we're looking at now is an opportunity to change that, to allow a different approach of planning where you can have more types of housing spread across the city and where you can locate things like the shops and the daycares and the plazas outside of those urban villages and throughout the whole city. And so we're really looking at an opportunity now to change and course correct. And as I said before, we only get one shot every decade to take a transformative use to this comprehensive plan. And that shot is due at the end of next year, at the end of 2024. So engaging in that process and sharing your thoughts and your experience is what I'm here to try to encourage you all to do.
Clara, how does the Seattle Comprehensive Plan approach transportation?
That's a great question, but can I respond a little bit to what Tiernan just said?
Of course.
Okay. One really important thing that I think you're talking about too, that you're sort of edging up against in the displacement conversation is like displacement. Sorry, can you hear me in the back? Displacement is often specifically because of the cost of living where you are, but it's also a very real fear and feeling of displacement when your community starts to leave and starts to get priced out, and the community centers that you go to and the businesses that you go to and your neighbors and friends are just as important. And I think it's sort of a circular problem where as soon as the community starts feeling that fear, more of the community starts to leave, and more of the community starts to have to do what Shirley was talking about, which is drive long distances to access those things and to access their friends and their businesses and their communities in a way that really kind of multiplies the problem and makes it significantly more impactful. So in what you're saying, when we're able to distribute that over a wider swath of the city and not concentrate it specifically in BIPOC neighborhoods or low-income neighborhoods like we have been doing, we're able to slow that and mitigate it by spreading it all over the city and making it not so concentrated in the areas. I've forgotten your question, sorry.
The transportation, how it fits into the comp plan.
So, I think that there's a lot of ways that the transportation parts of the city, obviously when we have greater density, we have more people that are able to access the dense transit networks, the bike lanes, the commercial districts that you're able to walk to. If we don't have density, there's just no way to build neighborhoods that people can walk and bike in because there's no destinations to walk and bike to. What's interesting is that we're doing also what's called the Seattle Transportation Plan, sort of in parallel with the Seattle Comprehensive Plan. And they're sort of interacting with each other back and forth a little bit because obviously as you're planning the density and where the density is going to go, you're going to also plan where the transportation to serve those people is going to go and vice versa. But the way that they're happening, I think the Seattle Transportation Plan is on a slightly faster timeline than the comprehensive plan. So it's a little bit confusing from the outside, but I think engaging with both is really important and making sure that both are pushing towards the values that we want is going to be the only way to really achieve the grand vision that we're all talking about here.
Cecilia, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about sort of the issues we're talking about in terms of how they relate to a city that hasn't been designed for access for everybody, including, as you mentioned, with 25% of the sidewalks missing, no curb ramps on half the blocks in the city, et cetera.
I guess to start off with, there's huge overlap between what people with disabilities need and what everybody else needs for transit. And so when we think about sidewalks, that's something that everybody uses and needs, and so that's an investment that we all need for getting aligns with our Vision Zero goals. It aligns with our climate goals, and so when we build roads that don't have sidewalks or that are just driver focused, it's not just that we are prioritizing cars over pedestrians with disabilities and bicyclists. It's that we're doing something, we're constructing and maintaining a transportation system that's in direct contrast to these big zero vision goals that we have and our climate goals. And I guess kind of to go back to the legislation that's going to be heard on Tuesday, it will require SDOT to construct or to build and repair any missing sidewalks that are adjacent to any of the road construction projects that they're constructing or repaving. Right now, that doesn't happen necessarily. If it's private property, that's still often left to the property owners. And funds, when roads are being reconstructed, funds still need to come from the sidewalk fund to repair the adjacent sidewalks. And so what we're hoping is that with this legislation, it will set a precedent where sidewalks can be part of road construction funding. And note this isn't ordinance is attached to any funding. It's really important to pass right before the transportation levy because that is an opportunity to then fund ordinance and fund roads in a way that will also include sidewalks.
That kind of gets into the whole issue of safety, which I know a lot of people in this room are very concerned about. We're talking about these plans on paper. Claire, I hope you could talk a little bit about how sort of these plans directly impact safety for people who are trying to get around the city.
I think that's the hope, yeah. So, we have a lot of plans in the city of Seattle. We like to write plans. We like to talk about plans. We like to plan for the plans and plan more after the plan. I think, part of what we as advocates
are pushing for is really that we need some accountability to those plans. We can paint a really beautiful picture of the kind of city that we want and of what we want those streets to look like. But when push comes to shove and there's a safety project going in on the street, are we as a city going to decide that keeping parking is more important than putting in a bike lane or expanding the sidewalk or slowing down vehicle speed in order to make it a safer corridor for people to walk along or roll along? And if we're not doing that, then what are we doing in all of these plans? And I think when we're talking about Vision Zero in particular, Vision Zero is the city's adopted goal to have 0 people killed or seriously injured on our streets in vehicle violence by the year 2030. And it's a goal that we adopted as a city back in 2015, and it's one that we have been making opposite progress on. Those numbers have been steadily increasing since 2015 in a very dramatic way, in a way that's really scary for a lot of us. And so if we're looking at a goal like Vision Zero, and then you're comparing it to a plan, we know that 80% of pedestrian fatalities happen on multi-lane arterials. We know that the biggest factor for whether somebody is killed or seriously injured is vehicle speed. And we know that we have to slow down cars in order to make our city safer. And somehow we're still not really doing that very well. When you look at a street like MLK, which was the image that we had up during the introduction, the sign speed there was lowered from 30 to 25. It hasn't really changed the way that the street operates in any way. In order to actually slow speeds, you need to change the design of a street in order to make it feel like you should be driving 20 or 25 miles per hour. Because if you're behind the wheel of a vehicle and you're driving, you're going to go the speed that feels comfortable to go on that road. And if there's a lot of space wide open in front of you and a lot of really fast moving cars next to you, it feels safest to go that speed. That's not like a personal moral failing for those drivers in most cases. It's actually just the way that it feels most safe to drive. And as a city, we know how to fix that. We can design streets so that it feels safer to go slower. We do that in a lot of places around the city. So I think that the most important part of all of these plans is how we're actually holding ourselves accountable to them and how we're actually setting goals and metrics that we can say we succeeded here or we didn't. And for Vision Zero, that means what are we doing in Soto? What are we doing on Aurora Avenue? What are we doing on MLK? On these really challenging streets with a lot of people trying to use them, how are we making it safer? Woo!
When you start talking about building a walkable city, there's a shorthand that comes up quite frequently that's been sort of taking on a little bit of a valence worldwide called the 15-minute city concept. Shirley, can you talk a little bit about how you see that as it relates to Seattle?
Yeah, sure. So a 15-minute city is sort of the idea that everybody should be able to walk or bike to everything that they need within 15 minutes, which would be amazing. I know that's certainly not the case for a lot of us right now. And so I think one really good way that we can start to accomplish that is to have a lot more mixed use zoning. So what does that mean? That's basically allowing not just housing to be built somewhere, but housing as well as cafes, libraries, childcare centers, all those kinds of essential services, so that it's not just like a whole neighborhood of houses and then large arterials with all of those services. Oh, a grocery store, that's a really important one. And it's not just, and building more housing helps with that, right? Because that's what gets you that vibrancy and the number of people that can support all those kinds of services, right? But it's not just that. It's what everyone else has been talking about too. It's if you really want people to walk and bike and be able to do that, you need those safe streets. So like I said, I live in Lake City, like on Lake City Way, and I have a neighbor who I met 2 years ago, and I've been getting groceries for him every week since, because we literally met when he was trying to cross Lake City Way. He had his arm, he's like 86 or something now. He has his arms full of groceries trying to cross Lake City Way after going to Fred Meyer. He had literally gotten like 10% of the way through the crosswalk when the light changed, and cars were trying to come barreling down the road. And it was one of like the scariest moments of my life. Like my partner and I were out for a walk after work, and we saw this person, and we were just like, oh my gosh, we're going to the crosswalk. Just started flagging like all the cars to slow down and stop and wait for this person. And so every week since then, we've been getting his groceries for him. But if the road was safe to walk on, his house is 10 minutes from Fred Meyer. He could have that independence. He could have been doing that by himself, but he can't make that crosswalk. It was like 2 or 3 more light changes until we made it, across there. And so all of these things have to happen together. It's not optional. Like it just has to. So. Oh, sorry, one more thing. I always have to push my parks agenda. So parks is also an incredibly important part of a 15-minute city. You should be able to access an amazing, incredible park within a 15-minute walk or bike ride of wherever you live. And that's not the case right now. Again, there's park holes throughout our city.
I think it would be hard pressed to come up with a more complete definition of 15-minute cities than what Shirley just shared. So what I want to add to what you said is to kind of like give an example of what I consider to be a 15-minute neighborhood here in Seattle, and then also show what's missing from 15-minute cities. So I live in the Chinatown International District, and I've been there for 14 years. And part of the reason that I've stayed in one neighborhood as long as I have is because I can walk to virtually everything I need in that neighborhood. There's a light rail station, excellent bus service, there are multiple grocery stores at different price points. I have an internship in the neighborhood. There's affordable housing that people can have access to in the neighborhood. There's market rate housing that people have access to. The list goes on and on. If you all are from Seattle, then you know what's so great about that neighborhood. And I think it does fit a lot of what we think of when we think of 15-minute neighborhoods. One challenge that neighborhood faces is that it is impacted by our transportation infrastructure system. The neighborhood is hemmed in by fast-moving arterial streets and is bisected by Interstate 5. The air quality in the Chinatown ID is some of the lowest in the city. The feeling of being unsafe is something that I've struggled with throughout the 14 years when I'm out walking around, and I'm a able-bodied person. There are plenty of elders in the neighborhood and other people who take a lot longer to get across the street. And so when I look at one of Seattle's best examples of a 15-minute neighborhood, I also see an environmental injustice situation that needs to be addressed. And so, I think that we need to plan for more neighborhoods like the Chinatown ID while also addressing the impacts of our denser mixed-use neighborhoods that we have today.
Quick programming note. You should have, or on a road near you, some note cards if you want to ask one of our panelists a question. We're not going to have a huge amount of time for questions, unfortunately, but we should be able to pick those up in about 10 minutes if you have a pressing question that occurs to you while our panelists talking. I do want to go over to Cecilia and sort of ask you sort of how you see the sort of 15-minute city concept, which has become incredibly popular as a shorthand for a walkable neighborhood, and sort of how that intersects with issues that you work with.
Yeah, I think about this especially especially in looking at the transportation plan where the priority investment in a lot of transit is on these high use traffic corridors. And for people with disabilities, we have two huge barriers against us. One, people with disabilities are more likely to be on fixed income and they're more likely to live in poverty, which makes finding a house incredibly difficult. And with that, it's even more difficult when you're talking about urban villages or these neighborhoods that have access to great transit, that have so many transportation options, that those are often neighborhoods that people are priced out of. And then on top of that, there is a serious shortage of accessible housing. I mean, across any income bracket, you can't find accessible housing, which is just tells you like how exacerbated that is when you are low income. And so a lot of these corridors that we're investing in that that have amazing transit are also the places that people can't live. And so I know the transportation plan has priorities to look at equity-based lens, but the reality is that lots of these neighborhoods that are in South Seattle or that are off the light rail path also are the places where people can live, but they are less likely to have sidewalks and they're less likely to have bus lines that are as many bus options as the rest of the city. Yeah, so that is a huge issue. And then just kind of like going on top of that, people with disabilities, I think, are in 2016 and 2020 were 4% of all traffic accidents and accounted for 55% of traffic deaths. And so when we have neighborhoods that don't have a lot of traffic, that aren't high density, that are the places where people are living, they're also just more dangerous because they are less likely to have sidewalk infrastructure that really protects everybody from our road-based city. Yeah.
Getting into the affordability issue, I think, is a good segue. Tiernan, how do we ensure that a walkable city is also an affordable city?
Yeah, great question. The two don't necessarily come together. I think that we need to sort of be doing two things at the same time. There's all the infrastructure that's needed to ensure that we can get around safely by walking, biking, and rolling. And then we just frankly need to build a lot more homes. Seattle has added a lot of homes in the last couple of decades, but we need to continue and even outpace our construction. And we know that we need to build market rate housing that people who are in higher incomes can afford to live in and rent. We also need to build affordable housing for people that are in low or no incomes. And then we need to experiment. And I think that the city's social housing PDA is going to be a really exciting and interesting experiment in developing alternative models of housing going forward. So those are kind of like a couple of buckets that we think about, and that when we're looking at the comprehensive plan, specifically the housing element, which is what they call the chapters of that plan, we want to see that the city is thinking hard about how it can support the development of a broad range of housing types in those three buckets. Within each, there's, all types of actual structures, the duplexes, the granny flats or ADUs, small apartment buildings, lots of exciting models that the city can help facilitate with its policy and pay for with its budget. But it's not going to be done with like one stream of housing production. We really kind of need to leverage everything we've got in order to bring down the cost of housing. And as Clara was saying, we won't be able to succeed if we only build those homes in small pockets of the city. There's some pretty good evidence that when you broadly change the capacity of what can be built across the city, it stops land values from spiking. And that's one of the major drivers of our housing affordability crisis. So we need to really be thinking big and making changes everywhere in the city where we build housing.
I agree with everything Karen said, and I also wanted to add that we need more tenant protection and rent stabilization, and we don't want the rent stabilization just here. We want it statewide. We even want it nationwide, right? So those things are really important, and and social housing. A lot of times people fall through the cracks who are kind of in that middle income tier, right? Like we like to say it's like the nurses, the firefighters, or teachers, or janitors. Maybe they don't qualify for the lowest income types of support, right? But they're still having a hard time. They're still struggling, and so it's really important to have, for example, in our social housing that allows people up to through those middle incomes to be able to get into there. And one other just kind of specific thing that I learned about recently, I want to share with you guys because it was cool to me. I learned about like parking minimums, and so if we get rid of those, like apparently if when you build buildings now, it requires a minimum number of parking spaces to go with it. And I read that it could be like 50,000 to 100,000 even for one parking space a lot of times because when you dig underground, it costs a lot. And that cost gets passed on to the people who eventually rent that from that place or who eventually buy that place, right? And so, again, by having this car-oriented infrastructure, we're just costing everybody so much. And so that's another way we can have more affordable housing. And I also realized that I looked this up right before I came. So apparently, the average amount that an American spends on their car per month is a little over $1,000. And I think about if we make a walkable neighborhood with housing that's accessible and for all income ranges, they can save $1,000. They don't have to have a car unless they really want to, right? And that saves them $1,000 right there. And so I think part of making housing affordable is making it walkable too.
Awesome. One note, we're going to get into the Q&A in a second, so if you have a question, make sure you hold it up and someone will come on and grab it. But I want to go back through the panel and just ask you, what is one thing that you wish got talked about more or you're always wanting to make sure people understand about the daily work that you do? Go ahead and start with Cecilia on the end.
Well, since we were just talking about housing, I just really want to drive the point home the serious lack of accessible housing and how that is left out of the conversation. Like right now, we are building a lot of apartments, a lot of multi-family homes, and still our very complicated requirements for required accessible units is the bare minimum that we have at a national level. And other cities have increased those. I would say not by a lot. But right now we are reconstructing our city and we're adding new housing and we are continuing to build inaccessible homes. And that is a huge problem for people across the economic spectrum, but especially again with our low income, we build affordable housing. We're still building affordable housing that has prepared and requirements for accessible homes. And then just getting back to transit and sidewalks, I think just really reiterating how important sidewalks are for everybody. And for people with disabilities, this is how we can move around. You don't have to you're just stepping off the curb or evaluating traffic at a crossing without a crosswalk, without a full pedestrian signal. And so, these methods are important to us. They are absolutely critical for our lives. They're absolutely critical for us to, access our daily necessities. But they're also so critical for everybody in our community. So even if you drive a car, you're going to park your car around the corner and use the sidewalk to get to your home. So this is not exclusive in any way to people.
I'm going to piggyback off of that exactly and talk about young kids, actually, because I am a new parent the last 2 years. I have two very young kids, and it really changes your perspective on how you move around your neighborhood and how you interact with your community when you're trying to herd kids on the sidewalk or if you're pushing a stroller and there's massive 6-inch uplifts and you're trying not to wake up your baby because they've been screaming all day. And, like the ways that we evaluate safety, I bike to get around most of the time, and I've changed my routes almost 100% since having a kid on the back of my bike because I have a much lower tolerance for biking with traffic because I'm scared that I'm going to get hit, and somehow in my head when I was younger and then not a parent, like, oh, maybe I could like ninja roll off my bike if I get hit by a car or something. I don't know what I was thinking, but like, you have a kid on the back and they're strapped in and they can't do anything. If your bike goes flying, they're gonna go flying with it, and I can hop up onto the sidewalk in some places if I don't feel like I want to be on the street, but that's really not an ideal place for me to be on a bike either. I think about when we're thinking towards the future and when we're talking about these long range plans, like what do we want the city to look like in 10 years or 20 years? And thinking, my kids are going to be 11 and 14 in 10 years. Like I want them to be able to run errands by themselves and walk to school and get to their friends' houses and bike places on their own without me. Like I don't think that's going to happen in my neighborhood right now. Like I can't picture that happening in any of the routes that I usually go right now. And how are we going to be able to change our city to make it so that my kids can do that? And every other set of kids here, and all the people that will be becoming disabled or elderly in that time. Like, what is the city going to look like? And how are we going to get around things that we do by then? So planning the city for future generations has been on my mind. Shoot, there's so much I want to say. But on that note about planning for future generations, again, I'm a climate scientist, so I think about climate refugees, but I also think about political. Okay, let me talk about that first. So for climate refugees, just this week, like the Wall Street Journal came out with this incredible article that showed all the cities that are going to have days that have wet bulb temperatures that basically you can't go outside, or if you do, you physically can't survive. And Seattle is one of the very few places that isn't going to have basically any of those days in the future by 2050. And so I think about all the people that are going to need a safe place to live because of climate change, and we should be that place for them. That we have a responsibility to do that, and we have an ethical responsibility to do that. And not only that, but there's political refugees, not just talking about internationally, but within the U.S. There's trans folks who aren't safe where they are right now. Sorry, my time. And they need a place to go. Seattle is a safe place for them. We need to welcome them here. We need to build housing so they can afford to live here. They deserve that. There's people who need reproductive care, right? They can't get there where they are right now. We need to be that place for them. And so that's why this is so important, you guys. There's so much on the line.
I think what I would say is that while there's a lot of technical and legal sides to the sort of planning and policy work that we're talking about up here, the most important thing is creating the political will to change. We all grew up in a country, we grew up here, that was planned around cars in the 60s and 70s. And so it's the era around us, and I think finally we are starting to see interest in changing that, whether it's from a transportation, a housing, a justice standpoint. We are seeing people looking around and sort of asking, why am I experiencing life this way? And why can't we do better? And the elected officials and the city staff need to hear from people that they want to see that change. And I think here we're all in some respect preaching to the choir, right? Your folks who are coming out to the Walkable Seattle event. But you all know people who you might not think of as being somebody who cares about these types of issues, somebody who doesn't come across as being like policy wonky or even like intellectual. But the fact is that those people are living through these same problems that we all are and are getting frustrated and want to see change. And so to the extent that we all can have those types of conversations and like paint that picture for them and learn from them what they want to see, like that's how we get to create the political will necessary to change it. Because it will take sacrifices, whether it's parking or changing the design of a street or allowing taller buildings with more units in your neighborhood. Those are going to be challenging changes, but we can all do our part in creating the political will. And so that's my encouragement. You don't have to come to all the comment periods and testify in front of the city council and do all those things unless you want to. But talking to your friends and neighbors and sort of raising these issues in a way that makes them feel comfortable and makes them feel valid is important. And it will help us actually make this mistake.
Getting close to running out of time, but I want to get to some of your amazing questions. Shirley, I'm going to go to you as the sort of place. Share the Cities is where the moniker four floors and corner stores originated, actually. This question is, what would it take to get some sort of legislation legalizing corner stores in front of the city council?
Oh, wow. I am not a super policy wonk, so I maybe don't know the answer to that, but I do know that if you all complain a lot, tell your friends, tell your elected, just all the time, like, you're going to have dinner with a friend tomorrow, complain about how there's not 4 floors and corner stores. And yeah, we do have to show up to public comment. It sucks, and it's not made for, people who are busy and, it's like geared toward retirees who can show up to something at like 3 p.m. or something. But let's do our best and let's show up and let's get it done. But, vote for the right people too.
That's a good Go ahead.
Can I add something? I just want to say, if everybody in this room sent an email to the city council right now and maybe got 1 or 2 of your friends to do it that says we want corner stores, I guarantee that somebody would start looking into it.
It's a great segue to this next question I want to ask and sort of Claire, actually. What can we do to pressure people in power and SDOT to make our sidewalks and roads safer besides voting?
Voting is a big one. A lot of our city council members are up for re-election this fall, or not up for re-election, but up for election as brand new candidates. And that's going to be really important. Telling the council members that you care about transportation and what you care about makes a real big difference. And, we always talk about, sending in emails and signing petitions and doing that kind of thing, but we can also get a little bit creative. Demonstrations, big rallies, events, art projects, things like that. One of the examples that I like to use is a few years back, then Mayor Durkin was delaying a lot of the projects in the downtown basic bike network that we were pushing for. And we got a whole bunch of people to go out and stand in 4th Avenue in front of City Hall and create a bike lane out of one of the vehicle lanes there. And we did it by standing there with our bodies and forcing cars to go one way and bikes to go the other way. And now we have a lane in that spot. And it's it's there because of people like you who went and like stood in the street and said, we want this to be safer for us. That's kind of an extreme example, but we can do the same thing when we're, doing art projects, painting different things. There was a really cool project that I saw down in, I want to say Columbia, but I'm not sure. I might be attributing to the wrong advocate, but they were going around and like spray painting all of the tiles on the sidewalks that were loose and were tripping people and causing a lot of injuries for people down there. There's artists who go around and like will paint different things on potholes, like force the city to come out and fix them. All of those little things can add up and make a difference. So like in addition to writing letters and lobbying your council members to doing stuff like that, you can also just get creative and fun about it.
On my lap, so we're going to talk about it, and then I forgot to talk about it. But one thing that you do is Disability Mobility Initiative started 2 years ago, A Week Without Driving, which will be October 2nd through 8th. And this year it's a national event, which is really exciting. And this is an opportunity to, one, participate in A Week Without Driving, and the goal is to, try to spend the whole week not using your car. And if you have to use your car, then really think about why and how this is a barrier for people that don't have access to that. But another major opportunity for this event is to pressure our elected leaders to try A Week Without Driving. We've had legislators in Washington State. We've had heads of different departments of transportation throughout Washington, city council members take A Week Without Driving. And I think for a lot of people and a lot of people that are in charge of these major transportation decisions, they haven't even considered what it's like to not drive. So this is a great opportunity to pressure all of our electeds to try this challenge and really open their eyes to what the transportation system is really like. And so we have 4 pamphlets over here. Everyone can sign up and everyone to get a message all of their.
One quick suggestion: if you're trying to figure out who you want to vote for in the city council election, the Complete Communities Coalition that I'm part of hosted 2 candidate panels last week, and we asked them a lot of questions about these topics that we're talking about tonight and heard their responses. One of the questions was, what specific thing will you do in the comprehensive plan? And 2 of the candidates said that they are going to work to make sure complete streets are part of every project. I won't tell you which ones said that because I want you to go and watch those videos, which are available on the Urbanist, Brian's publication, to go and check out those panels for yourself.
Very excited to wrap up with some concrete actions and steps you can take to make your city more walkable. I'm really sorry that we weren't able to get to all of your amazing questions. And so if you still want to talk about form-based code as an example here, there's a question here, you can definitely find our panelists here after the event. But I do want to go ahead and wrap up. Thanks so much for coming out. I'm going to ask Catherine Fleming to come to the stage. Catherine Fleming is a Seattle-based attorney dedicated to advocating for pedestrians, bicyclists, and others who are injured on the roads. And as a board member here with Seattle Neighborhood Greenways. Catherine, do you want to come to the stage and close us out for the evening?
Get another round of applause for Cecilia's point about a week without. I thought that was loud. A week without driving. Please get involved with that. That's a wonderful effort. Keep an eye out. When is that happening? Right around the corner, and it's a great way to bring attention to how many people around the state and our city they just can't drive, and they rely on different means, transit, walking, rolling, and biking. So thank you again. And so my role as an attorney every day, I have to work with my clients are injured pedestrians, bicyclists, people who roll, and it's heartbreaking because, as other attorneys in the room know, there is an epidemic. The number of pedestrians and cyclists, and it's just, the numbers are rising when they should be going down. We hear a lot of talk about complete streets and Vision Zero, and this organization, Seattle Neighborhood Greenways, is something that I feel really passionate about. And one of the ways that you each can help, I'm about to bring the card, you each got a card, and if you can take a look at it and turn around, I urge you, no amount is too small, but open up your wallets, and if you can give now, and if you can give on a monthly basis, that is a critical way that we can keep, as a group, as a coalition, keep turning up the pressure so we can get safer roads. Am I missing anything? So it's such a wonderful organization. I strongly urge you to get involved. Clara and Gordon, Rebecca, and all, they have a wonderful staff, but they also need to survive. And so your funding or your donations add up and help. And please spread the word. The word here is so pure. It's coming from ground up, coming from people like you who care. So don't hesitate to actually open up your phone, do the QR code, and please, just whatever you can afford, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks again. Have a great evening. We're going to be having, the panelists are available on the sides here, as well as some great city organizations to learn more about the topics we talked about tonight for the next half hour.